Please take your seats, folks. Chief. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. I've been asked in only the most polite way to rush this meeting through as if the floods are going to come into the auditorium at 8:15 tonight. A hush came over the audience, he said wistfully. Good evening. My name is Christopher Mena, and it is my privilege to serve as your moderator for this special town meeting. Before I call this meeting to order, I would like to recognize Selectwoman Beth Cassavant to make an important public service announcement.
Thank you. I just wanted to announce that the town will be holding a hazardous waste collection on Saturday, this Saturday, October 26th, from 9 a.m. to noon at the Oak Middle School, so that's here. And they'll be collecting for a fee all sorts of hazardous waste materials. There were flyers available on the tables when you came in, but also this information's on the town website.
Okay, thank you, Beth. I'd now like to recognize town meeting member Jason Molina for another important announcement. Jason, can we have a mic?
Good evening. The nonprofit named We Can, along with the towns of Shrewsbury, Grafton, Northborough, and Westborough, will be hosting a recycling and reuse event on Saturday, November 2nd, from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the Tufts Veterinary Campus in North Grafton. We will be collecting electronics, block, styrofoam, textiles, latex paint, so that paint that you couldn't drop off at the hazardous waste day, you can bring over to the other event on the 2nd, because that would be latex. And then you can bring books and other items. More details, go to wecan-ma.org.
Thank you, Jason. I have two more public service announcements that I've been asked to make. The first on behalf of Town Planner Bernie Cahill, who wants to remind everyone, if you picked up one of the postcards at the sign-in table tonight, you can take a look at it, please, that there is currently a town center rezoning study going on. Mr. Cahill and others are considering a number of options for rezoning the center of town. There is a presentation, I believe, at the Selectmen's meeting tomorrow night on the subject, and there are two public forums that will be held at the Shrewsbury Public Library for interested people on November 19th and December 11th. So please take the postcard home with you tonight and pin it to your bulletin board or your refrigerator, so that if you have an interest in zoning the center of town, you can attend one of these public forums. You can also visit the town website. There's a special site on the town website relating to the town center project. And finally, I've been asked to make an announcement on behalf of the Shrewsbury Historic District Commission that Shrewsbury's Civil War Monument, which has recently been cleaned and refurbished, will be rededicated on the occasion of its 150th anniversary this Saturday, October 26th at 10 a.m. on the town common, rain or shine. You're invited to join Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito, State Representative Hannah Kane, Town Historian Michael Perna, American Legion Commander Fred Russell, the Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War, and a cast of Civil War reenactors for what is certain to be a very moving ceremony honoring the 33 residents of Shrewsbury who gave their lives in the war to save our Union. So be there between soccer games if you can this Saturday. Okay, I'm advised by the town clerk that we have a quorum. Accordingly, the special town meeting of October 21st, 2019 is hereby called to order. With the tellers seated in the auditorium, please raise your hands. Would all town meeting members please come forward and take your seats in front of the tellers? If there are any individuals who are not elected town meeting representatives and do not have my specific permission to be seated in front of the tellers, please move to the seats behind the tellers. I have examined the warrant dated September 24th, 2019, and the constable's return of service dated September 26th, and find both of them to be in order. I ask for your unanimous consent to dispense with the reading of the warrant and the constable's return. Hearing no objections, it is so voted unanimously. I now invite you to stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, and please remain standing after the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing to remember a town meeting member who has left us since we last gathered here in May. David Campanello, who passed away on June 27th, represented Precinct 5 from 2012 until this year. Dave also served on the town's Fiscal Study Committee in 2013 and 2014. Our condolences go out to Dave's wife, children, and the entire Campanello family. Please join me in a moment of silence in memory of David J. Campanello. Thank you, and please be seated. Joining me here on the stage to my right and your left are Town Clerk Sandy Wright, Town Council Stephen Madaus, Assistant Town Manager and Economic Development Coordinator Kristen Lass, Finance Committee Chair Judy Vetter, and members of the FinCom, John Segelnik, Hannah Kane, Vikram Chabra, Patrick Pitney, Erin Howard, Jordan Rubin, Mark Murray. Did I miss someone? Okay. And please join me in welcoming Vikram Chabra, who began his term on July 1st. Welcome, Vikram. Seated to my left are Town Manager Kevin Mizikar and the Board of Selectmen, Chair Mo DiPaolo, Vice Chair Beth Cassavant, John LeBeau, John Samia. I would also like to call your attention to the town officials, department heads, and members of the various town boards and committees who are here with us tonight. Thank you all for being here and for your service to our town. And please join me in welcoming our new Water and Sewer Superintendent, Dan Rowley. Dan? As we welcome some new folks tonight, I also want to take a moment to say goodbye to two long-serving town meeting members who have retired from this body since our annual town meeting in May. Joseph Zecco represented Precinct 3 for 50 years, beginning in 1969. He will continue to serve as a sewer commissioner, a position he has held since 1997. Bruce Card has also retired as a Precinct 3 representative, a position he held for 42 years. Bruce also served on the Board of Selectmen from 1993 to 2008. Joe and Bruce, if you're watching this meeting tonight, please accept our thanks for your many years of service in our town government. Finally, I want to recognize the staff of Shrewsbury Media Connection, and especially General Manager Mark Serra and the production team here tonight for helping us with our audiovisual needs and for bringing this meeting into the homes of our viewers on SGTV. Now, if you've all got your green stickers on, please make sure that they are visible so that in the event that we need to take a standing vote, your vote will be counted by the tellers. Let's proceed to the warrant, which was mailed to each of you along with a memorandum and attachments from Town Manager Mizikar dated October 7th, 2019. And I will be referring to this memorandum and the attachments as we go through each of the 10 articles tonight. So please keep that memo handy. May I have a motion with respect to Article 1, Mr. DiPaolo?
I move the printed motion under Article 1.
Second.
The printed motion under Article 1 has been moved and seconded. This article proposes to make several adjustments to the fiscal 2020 operating budget as described in the manager's October 7th memorandum for a net budget decrease in the amount of $120,196. Finance Committee recommendation, Mrs. Vetter?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends Article 1 for approval.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments with respect to Article 1?
Mr. Moderator, I'll provide a brief overview. There's a couple complicating factors, but it's all good news. As the moderator stated, there is a total reduction in spending. Given that some of the funding reductions are related to debt service, which sits in the exempted tax levy bucket, it doesn't turn out to be a neat reduction that's equal to the amount that's being reduced from our estimates in May. But overall, it is still a reduction. We are bringing in additional funding from the Water Enterprise Fund in order to be able to cover some additional costs related to debt service issuances for that utility. The net decrease for the Beal Elementary School is because of a favorable AAA bond rating and will yield a total savings of nearly $4 million over the 20-year borrowing. The fire station long-term debt interest is a slight increase for this fiscal year, but over the life of that refinance note, the town will save almost $230,000, which there's 8 years remaining. Within the fire department was awarded a federal SAFER grant, and these funds will be used to match that grant in order to hire 4 additional firefighters during this fiscal year.
Are there any questions or comments with respect to Article 1? If you have your hand raised, I'm not seeing it, so maybe wave it back and forth. Okay, there being none, and this motion requiring a majority vote to pass, would all those in favor of the printed motion under Article 1 please signify by saying aye?
Aye.
Those opposed, please signify by saying no, and the motion passes unanimously. Is there a motion with respect to Article 2, Mr. DiPaolo?
I move the printed motion under Article 2.
Second.
The printed motion under Article 2 has been moved and seconded. This article proposes to create a town water system special purpose stabilization fund for the benefit of the Water System Enterprise Fund as described in the manager's October 7th memorandum. Finance Committee recommendation, Mrs. Vedder?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends Article 2 for approval.
And are there any questions or comments with respect to Article 2? Okay, there being none, and this motion requiring a 2/3 vote to pass, since it involves the establishment of a stabilization fund, we will proceed according to our town meeting bylaw and try a voice vote first. If I'm in doubt as to the sufficiency of the vote, we will immediately proceed to a standing vote. Would all those in favor of the printed motion under Article 2 please signify by saying aye?
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. And the motion passes unanimously, which is by a 2/3 vote. Article 3, Mr. DiPaolo.
I move the printed motion under Article 3.
Second.
The printed motion under Article 3 has been moved and seconded. This article proposes to transfer the sum of $1,940,000 from free cash to 3 accounts for improvements to the water system as described in the manager's October 7th memorandum. Finance Committee recommendation, Mrs. Vedder?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 3.
Questions or comments with respect to Article 3, Mr. Mizikar?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'll provide a brief overview of the financials related to the article, and I'll have DPW Director Howland provide an overview of what we're looking to accomplish. First and foremost, as was stated, this transfers $1,940,000 from free cash that was generated in relation to the water system that operated for fiscal year 19. We established an enterprise fund effective July 1st for this new fiscal year 2020, so this will be the last year that we need to come back to town meeting to be disciplined and transfer these funds out. These funds are generated in 2 main ways and flow to free cash. One is excess water revenues that come in over our estimates, and that was a little over $1.3 million, and that number is larger than prior years. Town meeting members may remember in May of 2018, after that town meeting, the water rate was changed, and however, we did not increase our estimates for the revenue for that fiscal year 19. And we didn't do that because oftentimes when you increase a water rate, users' use habits change, and we wanted to be conservative in that approach. And further, this gives us the opportunity to be able to make one rate increase and spread that amount over at least 5 fiscal years. So this was part of the plan. although the revenues were slightly higher because total consumption of water did not change as we anticipated that it might. So first and foremost, we'll move $250,000 into the new stabilization account that was just created in the prior article. The goal for stabilization for each of our utilities going forward will be to have approximately 5% of the annual operating budget in the stabilization account, and $250,000 represents 3.8% of the FY20 operating budget. So we'll continue to work on that over the years to come. The second bucket of funding is $825,000 will be moved to the water system improvement accounts. And this is the historic or most common transfer that happens with these funds that flow into free cash. It's primarily used to ensure funds derived from water rates remain with the utility and would be used for future appropriations. There's currently $200,000 in the water system improvement accounts, and should this article pass, there'd be $1,025,000 in the water system improvement account. Finally, which I'll have Director Howland come up and discuss how the $865,000 for water quality improvement initiatives would move us forward.
Mr. Howland.
Mr. Moderator, town meeting members. First, this is Dan Rowley, new Water and Sewer Superintendent. Started 5 weeks ago today. So he's a little, so bear with him. As many of you know, we have water quality concerns in our existing system. The water treatment plant went online roughly 1 year ago in October of 2018. The biggest issue that we see today is dirty water. The manganese that's leaving the plant is non-detect. We have no water leaving the treatment plant currently that has manganese in the water. The manganese that we see currently is from the residual that's been left on the pipes and was in the system from years of not flushing. So this appropriation for the $865,000, we have 4 different projects that we would like to consider moving forward. The first is unidirectional flushing, which is a different method of flushing than we have done in the past. It's actually, we close valves and use the flow rate to increase flow that scours out the pipes better than just flushing that we do currently, which is we open a hydrant and we actually just move the water around and we clean that general area, but we've moved it down the line. With unidirectional flushing, which is much more comprehensive, we have used a plan that was developed by our consultant. There's a 12 sections of town that we will do, and we'll finish one section, move on to the next. So the first round will be in an area which we have seen the most dirty water complaints, which is in our high water district, or basically the center of town north. We have a contract that is being bid this Thursday, and hopefully we will start 1st of November, and we'll go until the weather turns cold. And then we'll pick it up again in the spring. So we have 12 zones, 4 are in the high. That's zones 5, 6, 7, and 8. Depending if the bids come in good, we will also do zones 1 and 2, which is in the low pressure area by the treatment plant down to Route 9, including North Quincy. We plan on doing this on a yearly basis. We would like to do the rest of the town, the 2/3 of the town next year, starting sometime in the spring, going all summer long. The directional flushing is a lot more labor intensive. We have not unidirectionally flushed probably in 30, 40 years. This also requires us to exercise valves. We're estimating that 20% of our valves need to be either replaced or at least exercised, which sort of adds to this issue that we're having. As I said, the bids are due Thursday, and we hope to start the unidirectional flushing early November. Many of you have seen that recently we have found PFAS in our water. PFAS is emerging contaminant. It's a per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. There's a family of thousands and thousands of chemicals in that. They're man-made. We originally tested for PFAS, which is, there's 5 chemicals that count toward our number. We tested it under the UCMR 3 in 2015. The reporting limit back then was 20 parts per trillion. We were non-detect at that time. However, in 2019, the summer of 2019, DEP had requested that we water systems in Massachusetts voluntarily test for PFAS at a much lower detection limit. If you've seen the paper, I think there was an article in the Telegram Gazette several months ago, probably in July or August, that PFAS was found in the water systems in Air, Devons, Harvard, Littleton, Bourne, Westfield, most of them associated with military establishments. However, when we tested in July and then confirmed in August, we tested positive for PFAS. The limit is very low. It's below the 70, that's the EPA standard, 20, which is the state's projected standard, which they probably will promulgate sometime in January of 2020. The average of the 2 tests of our finished water is 13.65. We felt, however, after consultation with DEP, we felt that we should let the residents of Shrewsbury know that we did detect water or PFAS in our wells. They tested positive in all 7 of our current wells, ranging from 3.1 up to 21. Part of this funding will be to conduct a pilot study for PFAS. There's several different methods that we will look at. There's granulated activated carbon, and then there's ion exchange. It all depending on the type of PFAS that we have. Long chain works well with granulated activated carbon. The short chain is treated more with the ion exchange. So depending on which one we actually find and which one we're more gets us best results is what we'll look at either way. The third is the hexavalent chromium. We pilot tested hexavalent chromium while the treatment plant was being constructed. Unfortunately, while doing those testing, the hexavalent chromium in the wells that we were using went to 0. We could not pilot test anymore. So therefore, we had to abandon the original tests. So we are now in the process of reapproving a hexavalent chromium pilot testing using one of our existing wells, and then supplementing that with additional hexavalent chromium to get to a level that we can pilot. We will look at 2 options, biological treatment, similar to our manganese treatment, and then we'll also do ion exchange to see if that works. We're not optimistic about the ion exchange, as there's a lot of waste associated with that, which then requires sending that out for treatment later. We plan on starting the pilot once we receive approval from DEP, start piloting the hexavalent chromium in the spring after the freeze. The technology requires us to basically either build a building or have the testing equipment outside, which then, if we have it outside, we'll have to either put heaters in, so it makes more sense to do it in April once the freezing is, the threat of freezing is over. That pilot testing lasts 14 weeks, requires us to sample 3 times a week, 2 to 3 times a week, and send the lab results to Indiana, as there's only 2 labs in the country that can test for hexavalent chromium. The fourth thing would be to as issues come up, whether it's regular flushing or any other water quality improvement that we can do during the year after these 3 will also be included as part of this. Going back to the PFAS, Worcester DPW tested Bell Pond. If anybody knows what Bell Pond is, right off of Belmont Street in Worcester, right just below Worcester Votech or Green Hill Park, that has no inlet into that pond. So there's no water that comes in from the road, doesn't come in from the school, doesn't come in from the apartments behind it. It is a spring-fed pond. That tested 9.6 in PFAS. This is going to be an emergent contaminant that is nationwide. Basically, if you have not tested for PFAS, if you don't have PFAS, you probably haven't tested for it. Basically, I'll open that up for questions or through the moderator.
Questions or comments with respect to Article 3? Sorry. Oh, sorry. Yes, sir. Mr. Moss.
Brian Moss, 16 Ruthin Circle, Precinct 8. Just a question on the timeline. I was trying to listen in on when you said you first tested and when you found it. Can you describe again, like, when we think that those substances entered the water, or if that 2015 test would have detected something and it wasn't there? Can you just describe that timeline again?
Mr. Helen?
Mr. Moderator, we're not sure where the PFAS came from, when the PFAS was there. It was not detected in 2015, but the reporting limit was 20. That was as low as the labs could test. It was found in July of this year and then confirmed again in August.
Follow-up question?
Go ahead, Mr. Moss.
What, in PFAS, can you describe what the F stands for in PFAS?
Go ahead, Mr.
Pre
Helen.
and poly.
No, the F, not the P.
Oh. Fluoro.
Fluoro, do you know what substance that is, or?
It's a fluoride of some sort.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions or comments with respect to Article 3? Yes, sir. Mr. Garabedian. Is that Mr. Garabedian?
I'm interested to see if there's
Oh,
any
sorry.
type of reaction from the federal government, and if there's any type of support from the federal government, either from an intellectual standpoint or a financial standpoint, because it seems to be a very major emerging problem for all of us.
Mr. Helen?
Currently, the EPA is evaluating it and putting a standard, or recommend a standard of 70 parts per trillion. Massachusetts and several of the other states are going beyond that, and Massachusetts is looking at lowering it to 20. It is an emergent contaminant. There's a lot of studies still need to be done.
Further questions or comments regarding Article 3? Okay, there being none, and this, oh, sorry, in the back there. Having trouble seeing you.
Thanks. Catherine Rajwani, Precinct 7. With regard to the PFAS contamination, there have been some studies that have come out recently where PFAS was found in artificial turf. Have we been testing any of the runoff from the artificial turf fields?
Mr. Howland?
We have not, but I can say that the artificial turf does not drain or discharge towards our wells. They're in the opposite direction.
Where do they, because my understanding is that the high school field is in the Aquifer Overlay District, which feeds the aquifers.
Go ahead, Mr. Howland.
The high school is in technically a zone 3. The aquifer that these wells are in are zone 2, and there is a hydrogeologic difference between the two. The water from the high school does not go into our zone 2.
So where does it drain to?
Go ahead, Mr.
It
Howland.
drains to the south, and the wells are to the northwest.
Okay, so there, and with the St. John's, is that runoff tested? The St. John's field?
No, but that goes to the West River, which goes to the Lake Quincy directly. Does not go towards our wells.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions or comments regarding Article 3? Ms. Steering?
Martha Deering, Precinct 4. With this transfer from free cash, how much does that leave us in free cash?
Response, Mr. Mizikar? How much free cash would remain after this transfer?
So initial certification of free cash was $8,631,980. We're moving $1,940,000 out. I can do the math. Someone can beat me to it. Yep, a little less than 6.7 million.
Further questions or comments regarding Article 3? Yes, sir.
Kevin Flaherty, Precinct 5. Just curious, what is the long-term plan for our water system? It seems like every year or a few years, there's another thing or product that we find in the system. And I'm all for detection and the best drinking water we can get, but I'm just curious, what is our plan over the next 3 to 5 to 10 years in regard to how we will continue to manage this when things keep changing all the time? And what is the monetary side of that once we determine what the issues are?
Mr. Howland? Oh, Mr. Mizikar and then Mr. Howland.
So briefly looking backwards to 2014, 2015, the town undertook a comprehensive source study of all the different options that we may have for drinking water sources, and that included a well-based system that we have in place now, potentially tying into some surface water sources with the MWRA and surrounding communities. And it was ultimately decided upon through support of a 2016 report that we would continue to use the gravel-packed wells in the locations that we have them, because they produce the volume of water that we need to be able to service the community. On a daily basis, we're pumping 7 million gallons of water out of the ground and distributing to the customers. And after that decision was made, we then moved forward with the development and the construction of our new water treatment plant. But I do hear your concerns, because we share those same worries about what's next. As science gets better, and as we went from 2016 to 2019 in testing, we went from 20 parts per trillion being the lowest we could sample, now down to some labs less than 2 parts per trillion. So when you get better at testing things, you're going to find more things. So as we put these funds in place and look forward to the solutions for our water, we're going to try to be as robust as we can whenever we're implementing solutions to cast the largest net, but knowing that we have to move as expeditiously forward and get these specific contaminants out of water. So we'll be doing things like, when should we be filtering and out the PFAS? Should it be at the individual wells? Should it be at the finished water? At what stage in our process? Is it before the manganese is taken out, after the manganese is taken out? So we're going to look at all of that to try to, again, cast the largest net and give us as many options for the future. I'd love to say that this will be the last time we come back or identify a contaminant, but we just don't know. The town does participate, since we have over 10,000 customers, in these regular unregulated contaminants, every few years, which means we're searching for things that we currently hadn't been previously testing for. So we're going to try to be as broad as we can with our filtration and treatment processes, but we just don't know what's around the corner.
Further questions or comments? Yes, sir.
James Daly, Precinct 2. So since 2014, an estimate, how much money have we spent on our water system? Seems to be an exorbitant amount of money, or a large sum of money. Just trying to figure that out.
Mr. Mizikar?
I don't have a specific number for you. I can tell you on an annual basis, we spend about $6 million in operations. You know, over the past few years, we've been replacing mains at about $2 million per year. We have some other ongoing meter replacement programs, et cetera. So, you know, I would say on average every year we're spending about $7 to $8 million, and then we constructed the new treatment plant. This isn't a, you know, while manganese may have a disproportionate impact on the Shrewsbury drinking water system, there's something that has a disproportionate effect on everyone's drinking water system. You know, the City of Worcester, MWRA, they're all going to struggle with PFAS. They're all going to struggle with different things. Source water has different contaminants and byproducts that occur when you treat it versus groundwater. So there's no single perfect solution, and man-made chemicals have certainly complicated it. So we certainly are going to treat for everything that we know and can and do the best to stay ahead of the curve.
Further questions or comments? Ms. Hollenbach?
Lisa Hollenbach, Precinct 9. Kind of a follow-up to their questions. Water has been called the new gold for probably the last 20 years. I mean, not only Shrewsbury is having problems all over the United States, but as climate change is getting worse, we're seeing a lot more changes coming down, a lot of changes within the whole environment. Does Shrewsbury have any plans to possibly look into a sustainability committee in which water would be part of that, not only, you know, as far as, you know, drinking water, but as well as preserving water, that kind of thing?
Response, Mr. Mizikar?
I mean, there's no specific plans to do that right now, but I mean, it's something that certainly could be considered.
Further questions or comments, Mrs. Goldman?
Roberta Goldman, Precinct 8. I'm sure you've answered this question many times about the stabilization funds. I would just like to know, because our town is growing, we have lots of needs, and I support this measure. What have been some of the major sources that we get for funding our stabilization funds, and is that a problem, or do we have to do something more with it?
Response, Mr. Mizikar?
So the primary source of funding that we use to build up our stabilization accounts is free cash. And free cash, you know, has two primary sources: revenues that exceed our estimates and funds that are appropriated but turned back because we find more efficient or greater value or just lower cost estimates that come in through the actual bid process. So $8.6 million is the highest free cash has ever been for the community, so it remains strong and stable. I'll point to the town's recent upgrade of 2 rating levels with Standard & Poor's as a testament to the strength of the financial condition. We have the highest bond rating that you can get, which is a AAA. And I think the steps that the Board of Selectmen took last November in putting more emphasis on how much money is in stabilization versus how much is generated in free cash provides for that long-term stability in our rainy day funds and our long-term reserves that will keep the community stable. So free cash may fluctuate year to year, but the goal is to have a solid base within stabilization that is only touched if approved by this body.
Further questions or comments regarding Article 3? There being none, and this motion requiring a majority vote to pass, would all those in favor of the printed motion under Article 3 please signify by saying aye? Aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying no. And the motion passes unanimously. Article 4, Mr. DiPaolo?
I move the printed motion under Article 4.
Second.
Printed motion under Article 4 has been moved and seconded. This article proposes to transfer the sum of $35,500 from free cash to increase the fiscal 2020 appropriation for counseling and educational services as described in the manager's October 7th memorandum. Finance Committee recommendation, Mrs. Vedder?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends Article 4 for approval.
Are there any questions or comments with respect to Article 4? Mr. Mizikar.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'll provide a little more detail that's in the memo. The $35,500 will be broken out into two primary uses. The first is $6,200 for Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services to conduct an outreach needs assessment within the community to identify segments of the population where we can improve social service outreach efforts. And the second is to help support Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services fund an additional clinician roughly from the period of November 1st through the end of the year to be able to augment their existing staff. Shrewsbury Youth and Services does a wonderful job in being able to help meet the needs of the community, but currently has about a 6-month backlog in getting to meet the needs of residents. So this would help them increase staffing and provide additional services.
Questions or comments with respect to Article 4? Ms. Hollenbach.
Missy Hallenbach, Precinct 9. Frankly, I think they should get more. But the question I actually have is for our State Rep Hannah Kane. Sorry. That was not intentional, sorry. Over the years, we've seen state and federal funding leave for mental health programs. Can we see anything from a state or even if SYFS is here from a federal level? Because the need is there and it continues to grow.
Representative Kane.
Yeah, this typo.
Yes, so in the past 2 years, actually in the past 2 state budgets, I've put in an earmark for $50,000 each year for Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services, which they've received to go to support the youth mental health first aid training that they do not only in Shrewsbury, but across the Commonwealth. And the governor filed yesterday, actually Friday, I guess, legislation that is a large healthcare piece of legislation. In it includes a mandate for more funding to go into both primary care and behavioral health services. And that's something I think that we will take up this session and is very much needed and supported. So I would expect there to be more coming from that. There was also last year, the governor had filed some supplemental funding for an increase to counseling and mental health services. And I think he put in 32 million or 40 million. He didn't get all of that. I think he got $7 or $8 million from the legislature. But again, there's a lot that's going on to acknowledge the extreme need that's out there.
Thanks, Hannah. Any further questions with respect to Article 4? Okay, and before I call for a vote, the manager just informed me that there's a typo in the description under the motion at the bottom of the page, page 4 of Town Manager Mizikar's memorandum. The total appropriation for Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services, if this motion passes, would be $135,500. So strike 133.5 and replace it with 135.5. This does not affect the substance of the motion itself, though. So if there are no further questions with respect to Article 4 and this motion requiring a majority vote to pass, would all those in favor of the printed motion under Article 4 please signify by saying aye? Aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying no. And the motion passes. Is there a motion with respect to Article 5? Mr. DiPaolo.
I move the printed motion under Article 5.
Second.
Printed motion under Article 5 has been moved and seconded. This article proposes to transfer the sum of $33,000 from free cash for the town manager's office to conduct a survey of building and structures in Shrewsbury in order to determine historical significance and options to preserve them as described in the manager's October 7th memorandum. Finance Committee recommendation, Mrs. Vedder?
With a vote of 7-1, the Finance Committee recommends Article 5 for approval.
Are there questions or comments with respect to Article 5? Mr. Mizikar.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. These funds will be put in place to conduct a survey of structures within the community. We have a rough estimate of about 200 parcels that have structures upon them, and we've worked with a number of consulting groups. I'll remind the community that in the lead up to the annual town meeting and related to a citizen's petition, there was an ongoing discussion about how to preserve historic structures, and one of the concerns that was raised was that we didn't have a really good handle on what that definition of historical significance is and how many structures would fall into any category or designation thereof. So this is an attempt to baseline that and then determine next steps as with regards to historical significance.
Questions or comments with respect to Article 5? There being none, and this motion requiring a majority vote to pass, would all those in favor of the printed motion under Article 5, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying no. And the motion passes. Is there a motion with respect to Article 6? Mr. DiPaolo.
I move the printed motion under Article 6.
Second.
Printed motion under Article 6 has been moved and seconded. This article proposes to transfer the sum of $16,108 from the Transportation Network Company's assessment for the purposes of sidewalk, crosswalk, pedestrian mobility initiatives, and other programs that support alternative modes of transportation, as described in the manager's October 7th memorandum. Finance Committee recommendation, Mrs. Vedder.
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends Article 6 for approval.
Questions or comments with respect to Article 6? Anyone? Okay, there being none, and this motion requiring a majority vote to pass, would all those in favor of the printed motion under Article 6 please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying no. And the motion passes unanimously. Article 7, Mr. DiPaolo.
I move the printed motion under Article 7.
Second.
The printed motion under Article 7 has been moved and seconded. This article proposes, this is the first of 3 articles that are proposing to amend our zoning bylaw. Article 7 proposes to amend Section 9 of the town's zoning bylaw as described in the manager's October 7th memorandum. Let the record show that I've received a copy of a letter to Town Clerk Sandra Wright from Town Planner Bernard Cahill, stating, in accordance with the law, that on October 3rd, 2019, the Planning Board held a public hearing regarding Article 7, and that at the close of the hearing, the Planning Board voted unanimously to recommend approval of Article 7. Town Planner Bernard Cahill will provide some additional information on Article 7. Mr. Cahill.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you, town meeting members. Article number 7 is something of a cleanup article, is what we call it. Last year, you might remember, we voted for an article that removed the requirement that the chair of the planning board also serve as a member of the zoning board of appeals. Thanks to some very sharp eyes in the town clerk's office, they noticed after the fact that we had missed removing a reference to that appointment to the chairman of the planning board being appointed annually to that board. So that language is no longer required, so this is to clean it up and take that out. We've already removed that requirement, so this is, again, just a cleanup, and thank you to the town clerk's office for finding that.
Finance Committee recommendation, Mrs. Vedder.
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 7.
Are there any further questions or comments with respect to Article 7? There being none, and this motion requiring a 2/3 vote to pass, since it involves the amendment of the zoning bylaw, we will proceed according to our town meeting bylaw and try a voice vote first. If I'm in doubt as to the sufficiency of the voice vote, we will immediately proceed to a standing vote. Would all those in favor of the printed motion under Article 7 please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying no. And the motion passes unanimously. Article 8, Mr. DiPaolo.
I move the printed motion under Article 8.
Second.
The printed motion under Article 8 has been moved and seconded. This article proposes to amend Section 2 of the town zoning bylaw as described in the manager's October 7th memorandum. Finance Committee recommendation, Mrs. Vetter?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 8.
And Town Planner Bernie Cahill will provide some additional information on Article 8.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This is an amendment to an existing definition for gross floor area. Well, we were working on a few articles last spring, specifically around floor area ratio. We realized that this was kind of an out-of-date definition, but it was too late to get in for town meeting. Basically what this does is it kind of buffs out the existing definition, which is kind of very general, and provides a lot more detail to it that will help out homeowners, developers, the town zoning enforcement officer, and the planning department figure out what gross floor area is. So we took best practices from around the state, took a look at our own definition, and tried to include these greater details to help us out.
Okay, I've also received a copy of a letter to Town Clerk Wright from Mr. Cahill on behalf of the Planning Board Chairman, saying that on October 3rd, 2019, the Planning Board held a public hearing regarding Article 8, and at the close of the hearing, the Planning Board voted unanimously to recommend approval of Article 8. Are there any further questions or comments with respect to Article 8? There being none, and this motion requiring a 2/3 vote to pass, since it involves the amendment of the zoning bylaw, we will proceed according to our town meeting bylaw and try a voice vote first. If I'm in doubt as to the sufficiency of the voice vote, we will immediately proceed to a standing vote. Would all those in favor of the printed motion under Article 8 please signify by saying aye? All those opposed, please signify by saying no. And the motion passes unanimously. Article 9, Mr. DiPaolo.
I move the printed motion under Article 9.
Second.
Printed motion under Article 9 has been moved and seconded. This article proposes to amend Section 2 of the town's zoning bylaw as described in the manager's October 7th memorandum. I have a copy of the letter from Mr. Cahill on behalf of the Planning Board to Town Clerk Wright, dated October 4th, stating that on October 3rd, the Planning Board held a public hearing regarding Article 9, at the conclusion of which the Planning Board voted unanimously to recommend approval of Article 9. Mrs. Vetter, Finance Committee recommendation.
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 9.
Okay, and Mr. Cahill will again provide some additional information on Article 9.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 9 is to, well, let me back up one second. We have the definition, the use contractor's yard and storage yard in our use table already, but we've never had a definition for it. So this created the definition, so we now have it. We have a detail of what it is. It comes up more often than you think in discussions with various different people in town. Again, using best practices and looking around the state, we decided in conjunction with the building department and the zoning enforcement officer that this would be the best suited definition for the town of Shrewsbury. We did do a minor touch-up then to the zoning use table by removing underneath contractors' yards and storage yard. It was like a quasi-definition, so we just cleaned that up as well, since we now have a definition. Just a note, we didn't change any of the allowable, where it's allowed under different zoning districts. That's all staying the same. So this is just to create the definition, which we didn't have one before.
Further questions or comments with respect to Article 9? Judy, I asked you for your recommendation, did I not? Okay. Further questions or comments on Article 9? There being none, and this motion requiring a 2/3 vote to pass, since it involves the amendment of the zoning bylaw, we will proceed according to our town meeting bylaw and try a voice vote first. If I'm in doubt as to the sufficiency of the voice vote, we will immediately proceed to a standing vote. Would all those in favor of the printed motion under Article 9 please signify by saying aye? All those opposed, please signify by saying no. And the motion passes unanimously. Article 10, Mr. DiPaolo.
I move the printed motion under Article 10.
Second.
Printed motion under Article 10 has been moved and seconded. This article proposes to amend Article 17 of the general bylaws by increasing the maximum fine for violations relating to public health from $200 to $300 as described in the manager's October 7th memorandum. Finance Committee recommendation, Mrs. Vetter.
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 10.
And questions or comments with respect to Article 10? Mr. Mizikar?
Yeah, so this is a increase from $200 to $300 for any violation of the bylaw related to public health. This does bring us more consistent with surrounding towns, and this was discovered as we went through the process of updating regulations as it relates to flavored tobacco. So it provides, I guess, a more notable enforcement measure for the Board of Health to use should that and any other violation occur through under the bylaw.
Further questions or comments with respect to Article 10? There being none, and this motion requiring a majority vote to pass, would all those in favor of the printed motion under Article 10 please signify by saying aye? All those opposed, please signify by saying no. And the motion passes. This concludes the business of the special town meeting. Before I ask for a motion to adjourn, I want to thank you all for your attendance, your participation, your respect for one another, and your dedication to the government of our town. Now you can all start texting home and telling them to put on the popcorn. Is there a motion to adjourn? Second? All those in favor? The motion passes unanimously, and this special town meeting is hereby adjourned. Thank you and good night.